Okay, so Reagan is hugely popular, and we're going to talk about today his vice president, George H.W. Bush, who will become president next. He is, though, only a one-term president. Um, he will be defeated by Bill Clinton, who we'll be getting to in a bit. So we're just going to talk a bit about George H.W. Bush today. Key terms, make sure you can do these things. And there he is. There's George H.W. Bush with his beloved wife, Barbara. They are visiting American troops in Saudi Arabia in 1991. And so this should remind you guys we're going to be talking about the Persian Gulf War. So when the Cold War comes to an end, many Americans hoped that a new era of peace would dawn. Yet America's foreign policy during the Bush years demonstrated that the end of the Cold War would not lead to a new era of peace, but instead a dangerous era of regional conflicts. And so that's what we see here, where the United States, instead of dealing with like one giant enemy, is dealing with several regional enemies. There are issues surrounding refugees and sending aid to Somalia. In China, they're going to refuse to follow the Soviets' lead and instead respond incredibly violently to protests in Tiananmen Square. The U.S. response to those protests seems to be woefully unimpressive. There'll be some of that in your folder. In 1989, we invade Panama to replace the president, Manuel Noriega, who is actually going to be arrested and taken to the United States to face drug charges, where he will be convicted. And we go in and we restructure their government. I want to play you this video. So in Tiananmen Square is in China. There are these large-scale pro-democratic demonstrations that happen there. Remember, China is communist, and the Chinese government sends tanks in to disperse the protesters. This is a short video of some of that. You can see the tanks, and you can also see the protesters, and you can see this man right here. We're definitely not going to watch this whole thing. The Persian Gulf War. In 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. The United States, in order to protect Kuwait and its sovereignty and also oil interests, leads a U.S. coalition in a demand to in an effort to demand Iraqi withdrawal. Coalition just means a group of countries, so it's not just the United States on its own; it's a UN thing. The actual conflict in Desert Storm is known as Operation Desert Storm. It begins with an air attack followed by a ground invasion. It takes 100 days for Kuwait to be liberated. And as a matter of fact, I remember this. This is really the first war. You know, we talk about Vietnam being the first war where journalists are really publicizing a lot of images of the war. Desert Storm is really the first conflict where our journalists are like live streaming it. I mean, I know Twitter, that's not like a thing yet, but these 24-hour news networks, like this image right here, CNN, they're filming exactly what's going on. And I remember I was a kid at the time, but I had a much older, because I'm so young, cousin who was fighting there, and we knew he was deployed in Iraq, and we were watching it on the news, and of course I didn't have like a super sophisticated understanding of that kind of thing when I was like 8, 9 years old, but I remember thinking, like, what if we're watching a video of him fighting right now? And I think a lot of families have that same experience, which leads to a really heightened awareness of what war means.
Over the past century, the United States has gotten involved in its fair share of Middle Eastern affairs. In 1991, America again found itself in the middle of an armed clash, this time between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and its neighbor Kuwait, in what would become known as the Persian Gulf War. Here are 5 points you should know to better understand this conflict. Few people would have called Saddam Hussein a stable leader. From the start of his reign in 1979, he ruled with an iron and often reckless fist. In 1990, Saddam sought to acquire Kuwait's vast oil reserves. Publicly, he justified the invasion by claiming that Kuwait belonged to Iraq in the first place and had been unfairly carved out as a separate country by the League of Nations. However, Kuwait actually became independent before Iraq's sovereignty, making his thinly veiled argument ridiculous. Either way, Saddam seized Kuwait on August 8, 1990, causing an international uproar, with the United States being the loudest voice.
The United States strongly condemns the Iraqi military invasion of Kuwait.
Soon after the invasion, the United Nations Security Council declared that if Saddam's forces did not withdraw from Kuwait by January 15, 1991, military force would be used. You can guess what happened. On January 16th, the offensive against the Iraqi army began, fought by a broad coalition of armed forces from the United States, United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, among many others. The first stage of the Gulf War was named Operation Desert Shield, which actually began before the international coalition was brought together. When Saddam first invaded Kuwait, the United States rushed troops into Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, to prevent a possible attack. But after the Security Council's declaration of war, it became the American force that would invade Kuwait. The main phase of the war was codenamed Operation Desert Storm, which began on the morning of January 17, 1991. Desert Storm was a massive bombing campaign targeting Iraqi aircraft, anti-air defenses, oil refineries, communication lines, weapon factories, bridges, and roads using the latest American military technology, including stealth bombers, cruise missiles, and smart bombs. After a month of Desert Storm, the coalition aimed to finish the job. The coalition's ground offensive, known as Operation Desert Saber, began on February 24th, 1991. By February 28th, the war was over.
And as president, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
In 4 days, the U.S.-led forces retook Kuwait's capital and forced the entire Iraqi army into retreat. In all, Iraq lost somewhere around 30,000 soldiers, while America and its allies only lost 292 total. The Persian Gulf War was an easy and lopsided victory for the United States, but not one without serious consequences. President George H.W. Bush decided not to depose Saddam Hussein, as he didn't believe regime change would be popular with America's allies. In the wake of the war, Kurdish and Shiite Iraqis rose up against Saddam, who in turn brutally crushed their rebellions. After the UN accused him of using chemical weapons against his own civilians, Saddam was forced to allow UN inspectors into Iraq. He barred the inspectors in 1997, and from then on, it became the United States' goal to remove Saddam from power. This snowballed into the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Saddam Hussein's capture by American forces in 2003. He was tried, convicted, and executed by the new Iraqi government in 2006.
People in large numbers came out and joined what became known as the Red Guards.
Something is happening outside. The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky.
The sky continues to be filled with tracers as the anti-aircraft weapons continue to fire. Another huge, loud burst from the ground. More tracers going up into the air over the city. And there's a lot of fire going up. And as I say, these bombs continue to come down occasionally on the ground here. There's no sign that any of the aircraft that are involved in this, not from Iraq but from the Allied forces, have suffered any damage.
Pentagon officials say it should have come as no surprise that this attack started tonight. They say that the United States wanted to start the attack at night. There are specific targets for almost 5.5 months.
Do y'all recognize Wolf Blitzer? If you watch CNN, how young he looks right there, and yet he looks exactly the same. The most important foreign policy challenge faced by the Bush administration took place in the Persian Gulf, and this is, of course, Saddam Hussein. A map of air bases, naval forces, attacks, retreats. After the 91 Persian Gulf War ended, President George H.W. Bush approval rating reached 91%. But in less than 1 year, public opinion changed. Saddam Hussein stayed in power, continuing to threaten peace in the Middle East. People started to think he didn't get the job done. The American economy had gone into a recession. The federal deficit had risen. People were angry by Bush's betrayal, where he said he wouldn't raise taxes, and then he does raise taxes. Now, a lot of this is the legacy of the intense military spending from Reagan that it took to end the Cold War. But nonetheless, Bill Clinton gains popularity. There he is with his wife Hillary speaking to supporters in the 92 presidential campaign. The economic slowdown caused in part by a slowdown of military spending with the end of the Cold War. A serious deficit leads to a need to repay the debt. Bush tries and fails to fix the recession. Bill Clinton comes in 92, calls himself a new Democrat, wins after blaming Bush for the recession. And also, probably helped by this guy in the top right, a third-party candidate named Ross Perot, a billionaire from Texas, who took a lot of votes away from George H.W. Bush. But of course, he does not. And then this gem of a video from Bill Clinton on the Arsenio Hall show kind of shows you why he was so popular with so much of America. He was considered fun and different. George H.W. Bush was considered old and out of fashion. Right, future president of the United States. So there you have the 1992 presidential election, Clinton and Bush, the legacy of Ross Perot. He's the first third-party candidate to gain a significant share of votes since the election of 1912. He wins 30% of independent votes, 17% Republicans, 13% Democrats. When Bill Clinton becomes president, the more than 40-year-old American foreign policy of fighting communism had just ended. The U.S. needed to develop a role for itself in the post-Cold War world. Americans are willing to provide economic aid as they did to nations of the former Soviet Union, but many of them question military intervention abroad, fearing a costly commitment like the Vietnam War. Somalia is an example of a place where the United States tries a combination of economic and military aid. Bosnia, the breakup of Yugoslavia creates a lot of instability in the Balkans. This will be another place where Clinton will intervene militarily. And in the 1990s, Israel's military will respond to attacks by Palestinians, leading to a growth in violence in this region. Clinton will work to address it, but violence will originate in this region and spread outward, with the United States increasingly as a target. This is an image from 1993 when an Islamic terrorist detonated a bomb in the parking garage of the World Trade Center in New York City. He had intended to destroy the buildings. And so I know the World Trade Center is what was bombed in 9/11, but this is 1993. It was the first attack on that building. When Clinton took the presidential oath of office in 93, he faced a great challenge. Since 1968, Americans had chosen Republican presidents in 5 out of 6 elections. The Republican argument that government needed to be small and less intrusive resonated with Americans. Clinton therefore needed to chart a middle course between limited role advocated by Republicans and the traditional Democratic reliance on government to address social problems. And so I want you to look here and see what type of legislation we have. We have the Brady Bill, we have the Defense of Marriage Act, we have the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, and the Taxpayer Relief Act. This is an image of his wife Hillary Clinton testifying before a House committee hearing about health care. She was the head of the healthcare task force aimed at making healthcare more affordable for all Americans. Her big push was to make healthcare free for children. After 2 years in office, Clinton had achieved a few lasting legislative victories, yet the failure of his healthcare initiative signaled that his popularity and his control of Congress was waning. With the 94 midterm elections approaching, congressional Republicans seized the opportunity. So halfway through his term in office, Republicans gained seats in Congress. And so this is 94. Again, halfway through his term, you see the growth of Republicans in the House plus 54 and in the Senate plus 9. President Clinton is also going to be dealing with scandals from the very beginning. One was a sexual harassment suit from when he was the governor of Arkansas. Another had to do with investments made in a corporation called Whitewater, which will lead to a special prosecutor, this man right here, a man named Kenneth Starr. And the prosecution will lead to the impeachment of Bill Clinton, but he will not be convicted. So impeachment, remember, because we've been through this twice now with Donald Trump, impeachment means that Congress is saying that the president needs to be put on trial. This isn't a criminal trial. This is a political trial, right? It's to determine if he did something to violate his oath of office. If he did, he can be removed. They can vote to remove him. So just, Andrew Johnson was impeached, but not removed by one vote. We know Nixon probably would have been removed, but he resigns first. Trump is impeached twice, retains office twice. He's not removed. Clinton will be impeached, but he will not be removed. And then also during the 20th century, the rate of technological change speeds up dramatically. We have new technology involving every aspect of life. This is the internet, the age of the phone. All of this is in your text, and we'll be talking about it more. This is a graph showing us computer and internet access and how it increases. And then the dot-com boom. All right, guys. Thank you all very much.